everyone, and welcome to Module 1 of Organizational Behavior, Theory, and Design. The reading assignments are available on Brightspace for this specific module. I highly encourage you to read through the text as indicated in Brightspace before accessing these lecture recordings, as a detailed information is available in the text, which is necessary for you to go through in order to be able to complete your assignments properly. And I will go over the major themes that are identified in that text in our lectures. Now, the learning outcomes for week 1 basically include understanding the definitions of organizational behavior, diversity, equity, and inclusion, along with diversity management and cultural competency. At the end of this module, you should be able to identify major trends and challenges due to changing demographics of the healthcare workforce. You should be able to explain the importance of culturally competent workforce in meeting the need of patients. And you should also be able to explain the perception process, communication process, and identify various verbal and nonverbal methods of communication. Now, before we go into the definition of organizational behavior, what exactly are organizations? Organizations are socially constructed entities created for specific purposes. Now, they are goal-directed. They're composed of people tied together in formal and informal relationships and linked to their external environment through their customers, suppliers, competitors, and government regulatory bodies. Now, the central aspect of an organization is the coordination of people and resources to produce a product or provide a service. Now that we know what organizations are, what exactly is organizational behavior? The organizational behavior concentrates on what certain individuals do. It investigates the reasons for such behavior and then employs an evidence-based intercession policy to make the individual's actions more proficient. Now, why do we need to study organizational behavior, and why do, as health administrators, you need to know about organizational behavior? Because it attempts to explain why individuals and groups behave the way they do within an organizational setting. It tries to predict how individuals and groups will behave based on the internal and the external factors. And it also provides managers with tools to assist in the management of individuals and groups' behaviors, so they willingly put forth their best effort to accomplish organizational goals. Now, let's go through the history of organizational behavior a little bit, starting from Taylorism. So back in 1909, Taylor published the Principles of Scientific Management. In this, he proposed that by optimizing and simplifying jobs, productivity would increase. He also advanced the idea that workers and managers needed to cooperate with one another. Taylor believed that all workers were motivated by money, so he promoted the idea of a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Now, over here, we are seeing that the motivational factor identified by Taylor is money. While in Hawthorne studies, they showed that people's work performance is dependent on social issues and job satisfaction, and that the monetary incentives and good working conditions are generally less important in improving employee productivity than meeting individual needs and desires to belong to a group and be included in decision-making processes. Now, if you move from the Hawthorne studies to McGregor's theory of management, he explained this theory first in The Human Side of Enterprise, his book, and then he refers to two styles of management: the authoritarian style, which was called Theory X, and the participative style, which is Theory Y. Now, what are these two styles? If you believe that your team members dislike their work and have little motivation, then according to McGregor, you'll likely use an authoritarian style of management. The approach is very hands-on and usually involves micromanaging people's work to ensure that it gets done properly. On the other hand, if you believe that your people take pride in their work and see it as a challenge, then you'll more likely adopt a participative management style. Managers who use this approach trust their people to take ownership of their work and do it effectively by themselves. The approach that you take will have a significant impact on the ability to motivate your team members. So it's important to understand how your perceptions of what motivates them can shape your management style. Now, another important thing when we are talking about organizational behavior is to understand the changing US demographic. Now, this demographic is changing not only for the US population, which will impact your patient population, but it is also changing for the US workforce population. And in order to better manage this workforce, you need to understand what exactly is happening with the US demographic. In this visual, you can see that a projection is made for the population in 2060. And the major changes which are seen are in ethnic and racial composition of United States. I would like you to focus on the Hispanic and the Latino population at the bottom, where their percentage is changing from 17.8 to 27.5, whereas two or more races like biracial or multiracial is changing from 2.6 to 6.3. At the same time, the aging of the population is occurring, with ages 65 and over in 2016 comprised of only 15.2% of the total population, while they're projected to be 23.5% in 2060. Gender and educational levels by age groups have also evolved over time, and a huge difference will be seen as compared to what we are seeing today. Keeping that in mind, any good healthcare manager needs to know what exactly is diversity and how to manage that diversity. Now, diversity in its definition is the full range of human similarities and differences in group affiliations, including gender, race, ethnicity, social class, role within an organization, age, religion, sexual orientation, physical ability, and other group identities. So essentially, diversity is a lot of things, from differences from education, language, and background to race and gender identity. What does that mean in healthcare, though? So in healthcare, diversity management generally refers to human resource management and other practices related to recruitment and retention. Cultural competence in healthcare refers to the capacity of systems, organizations, and personnel to meet the needs of diverse patients, families, and communities. Now, studies suggest that diversity in healthcare leadership can enhance quality of care, quality of life in the workplace, community relations, and the ability to affect community health status. Now that we know what diversity is, we have to focus on equity. Equity is providing fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people, while at the same time striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. Improving equity involves increasing fairness of the procedures and processes within the organization, as well as in their distribution of resources. Health equity means giving patients the care they need when they need it. Or as the Institute of Medicine report puts it, health equity means providing care that does not vary in quality because of personal characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, geographic location, and the socioeconomic status. Now, what does a diverse and equitable workforce environment need? It needs inclusion. So inclusion refers to the act of creating environments in which any individual or group can feel welcomed, respected, and supported, and can fully participate. Inclusion in healthcare means giving both employees and patients a voice to help provide or receive high-quality care, and encouraging the presence of a diverse healthcare staff in the treatment experiences of the patients. Now, another important factor in studying organizational behavior is the attitudes of the individuals at the workforce. Attitude is a term which is used a lot, but what exactly is the definition of the attitude? Attitude refers to our opinions, beliefs, and feelings about aspects of our environment. We have attitudes towards the food we eat, people we interact with, courses we take, and various other things. At work, two particular job attitudes have the greatest potential to influence how we behave. Number one is job satisfaction, and number two is job inclusion. Now, how are attitudes formed? Attitudes are formed right from the day the person is born, so they are learned over time. They can be modeled in front of the individual, which can eventually have an impact on developing a specific kind of attitude towards somebody or something. And then it is also depends upon our previous experiences in life. In order to change somebody's attitude, the cognitive and emotional components of that particular attitude need to be addressed. We need to provide new information in order to either negate or reinforce the existing information which is present in an individual about thus creating the attitude of an individual towards that specific attribute that we are looking at. And then we should always be cognizant of the fact that changing someone's attitude takes time, it takes effort, and it takes determination. You cannot expect to change an attitude of an individual overnight. Perception. Now, what exactly is perception? The process by which individuals interpret and organize sensation to produce a meaningful experience of the world is perception, or basically it is an individual's reality. So whatever is our reality is our perception. The perception process is basically consists of 4 different stages. The first stage is the stimulation, in which various different stimuli are received about a particular thing or a person or a job. And these stimuli reach to us through our 5 senses that we have. These stimuli are then registered within our central nervous system. The selective stimuli about a particular thing are taken into the registration process. And our brain then organizes the information that is registered based off of the stimulus that was received on the basis of the prior experiences and beliefs. And once that organized information is available, it is then interpreted, which results either in the positive feedback or in the negative feedback. Now, the positive feedback means that the new stimulus which we have received has reinforced our existing information, which we have from our previous experiences or beliefs, and eventually reinforce the interpretation of one's reality, while the negative feedback, in which this new information has resulted in creating an internal conflict, which needs for re-examination for future reference. The attribution theory is in terms of perception and then the attributes. The attribution theory is concerned with how ordinary people explain the causes of behavior and events. For example, is someone angry because they're bad-tempered or because something bad has happened to them? A formal definition of the attribution theory is provided by Fisk and Taylor, 1991. The attribution theory deals with how the social perceiver uses information to arrive at causal explanations for events. It examines what information is gathered and how it is combined to form a causal judgment. Now, in this example on the slide, you can see that there is a behavior or an outcome which is seen by a manager in his or her employee. Now, observations by the manager will result in what exactly they think about the behavior that they're seeing, whether it is that person specific or it is something which is task specific. Then the consistency, whether it is occurring just for that person at that specific level, or is that something that is being experienced by all the individuals for that specific task. Then distinctiveness, again, is that if it is only this task that is specifically resulting in poor employee performance, or that employee's performance is poor for all the other tasks. So this is what the observations the manager is getting from all the various different senses that they are getting. And eventually, the external factors and the internal factors are taken into consideration, which eventually results in the attributions made to explain the employee's behavior by the manager. And this is how we apply the attribution theory to any behavior that we see within an organization. Now, in addition to individual perception, in which how an individual sees others, there is also the perception of how others perceive an individual. Now, social perception basically is accomplished through various means, such as classifying an individual on the basis of a single characteristic, which is a halo or a horn effect. It occurs when an individual forms a general impression about another person on the basis of a single characteristic, such as intelligence, sociability, or appearance. Evaluating a person's characteristic by comparison to others is called the contrast effect. It relates to how an individual is perceived in relation to the others around them. Whereas projection is perceiving others in ways that reflect a perceiver's own attitudes and beliefs. Whereas when we're talking about contrast, we are talking about the effects that the perception of an individual are based on comparison of that individual with the other. But in projection, we're actually projecting our own beliefs on that other person. The other terminology that you see on this slide is stereotyping. Now, stereotyping is basically judging someone on the basis of one's perception of the group to which that person belongs. And then Pygmalion effect is causing a person to act erroneously on the basis of other person's perception. Impression management is controlling another person's perception of one's self. So various different types of social perceptions are present, and how they come into play was just explained. But there are a lot more factors that go into these perceptions, which need a lot more detail. Now, in any organization, for a manager to be better able to understand what exactly is happening within the organization, the feedback is very important. So any information that individual receives about their behavior is basically feedback. In terms of one-way communication, it occurs when a person sends a message to another and receives no feedback of any kind from the receiver, as when a person gives an instruction or directions through a memo or an email. Two-way communication, by definition, is the interchange of information and ideas from the sender to the receiver and vice versa. Now, there are different levels of feedback within an organization. It can be task or procedural feedback. Feedback at this level involves the issues of effectiveness and appropriateness. It can be specific issues that relate to task feedback, like quantity or quality of a group's output. Relational feedback provides information about interpersonal dynamics within a group. This level of feedback emphasizes how a group gets along while working together. While the feedback that focuses on a particular individual in a group is that individual feedback, and the feedback that focuses on how well the group is performing is the feedback for that group. Now, the process of feedback can also be illustrated by Johari's window. As you can see in this visual, it gives a visual of the Johari's window, in which the window is divided into 4 different pans, and every pan has a different meaning or understanding. Let's go over them. The first pan in the window is referred to as an open or arena. Now, this quadrant represents the actions, behaviors, and information that are known to the individual and those around them. This information is public and made available through communication and exchanges between the individual and the others. And this includes information such as facts, skills, and attitudes, anything that is public knowledge. Now, the second pan is the blind area. Information in this area is particularly useful in the 360 reviews for personal and professional development. Actions and behaviors in the blind area are known to others, but the individual is not aware of them. The information in the blind spot can be positive or negative and include hidden strengths or areas for improvement. The blind spots that are discovered in 360 evaluations give great insight into how others perceive the individual, which forms the starting point for the development. Hidden is the third pan in the upper left quadrant. You can see that it is also called hidden or facade. Now, this information is known to individual, but not known to anyone else. This may consist of private information which the individual chooses to keep hidden. Feelings, ambitions, dreams, and opinions may be withheld from the group by the individual out of fear of negative reaction. Once the individual trusts others, they may choose to reveal some of their hidden information. Now, the fourth pan, as you can see, is the unknown. The last window of information is referred to as simply unknown. This includes information, skills, behaviors, etc., that are unknown to the individual and to others. This includes subconscious information that no one is aware of, such as early childhood memories, undiscovered talents, etc. The Johari window can also be used for opening channels of communication. Open communication is important for improving employee morale and increasing the worker productivity. Now, open communication allows supervisors and subordinates to freely discuss organization-related issues such as goals and conflicts. Johari window model has two key concepts. You can build trust with others by disclosing information about yourself. With the help of feedback from others, you can learn about yourself and come to terms with personal issues. Now, we touched upon the communication in the Johari window. Now, there are two types of communications which exist: verbal communications, which can be your words, written in an email or a memo or a newsletter that goes out, and nonverbal communication, which is usually when words are not utilized. And these can be gestures, this can be just your body language, and other forms of nonverbal communication. Then there are also levels of communication or communication channels within an organization. The lowest level of communication is what I just mentioned, was the formal written report, bulletin, newspaper, in which there's sort of like one-way communication going on between the supervisor as compared to the employees. Information richness is the second step that comes in which, just like that paper-based communication is moved on to other media like web page or individualized letters, policy statement, television, radio, etc., or fax message and electronic email. But the highest level of communication in any organization is that face-to-face interaction. We have heard quite a bit about this face-to-face interaction during this COVID era, in which we were not able to have those face-to-face interactions. And then another medium came into play, which is the virtual face-to-face interactions, which are considered to be almost as effective as like in-person face-to-face interaction. And that's the highest level of communication that can occur in an organization. Now that we know the various different channels of communication and then the levels of communication, there are some barriers to communication within an organization. And it's very important to understand that these barriers can result in very much adverse effects in terms of the overall productivity of an organization. Now, these barriers can be external. They can be the organizational complexity. They can be competition for time and attention, multiple levels of hierarchy, managing the managerial philosophy, power and status relationship, and then specific terminology can also be an external factor in that barrier to communication. Whereas personal factors or internal factors can be the frame of reference, beliefs, values, prejudices, selective perception, jealousy, fear, evaluation of source and status quo, and lack of empathy can all lead to those barriers in communication. How to overcome these? The first and the foremost is attention is given to messages and adequate time is devoted to listening. Management philosophy, encouraging the free flow of that communication, reducing the number of links between the sender and the receiver, tailoring words and symbols so messages are understandable, and using multiple channels to reinforce complex messages. As you can see from these figures, the effective communication for knowledge management comes from the desire to communicate and understand how the others learn. And there are times when the managers, they have a desire to communicate with their employees, but they are not completely understanding how the message can be relayed to their employees so that they understand the context behind that message and are able to put forth their best possible effort into achieving the desired goal of that communication. So it is very important for the manager to understand these two components, which can then result in effective communication and obviously make a better understanding about the purpose, the content, and the sender credibility and time frame in which the desired outcomes can be achieved. Now, there are other forms of communications as well, which are very important for the human resource management. One of them is the strategic communication. That is an intentional process of presenting ideas in a clear, concise, and persuasive way. Now, for this type of communication to occur, again, You need to keep an eye on the ultimate outcome of that communication. You need to provide a context for that communication. You need to have that message directly delivered or in a way delivered to your employees so that it reaches them in the most pure form as it was intended. And then the tactical reinforcement and taking into consideration the feedback. It's always a good idea to ask for feedback from your employees whenever you're talking about any sort of communication. Now, within an organization, the flows of intra-organizational communications can be in various different directions. You see all these arrows on the slide. There is an upward flow. The purpose of the upward communication flow is to provide managers with information to make decisions, identify the problem areas, and collect data for performance assessments, determine the staff morale, and reveal employees' thoughts and feelings about the organization. The downward communication involves passing information from supervisors to subordinates. This includes verbal and nonverbal communications, such as instructions for completing tasks, as well as one-to-one communications. Downward communications include meeting with employees, written memos, newsletters, bulletin boards, procedural manuals, and clinical and administrative information systems. Horizontal communication, also called lateral communication, is the practice of sharing information between employees, departments, and units within the same level of an organization, whereas diagonal communication refers to the communication that crosses both levels and functions or departments, where staff members from different departments, irrespective of their reporting relationship, interact with one another within the organization, within that specific organization. Now, there is also two types of communication networks within an organization. The centralized communication network restricts the number of individuals in communication chain. In a group setting in which a dominant leader takes over group discussions by controlling the number of messages and amount of information being passed, group members do not interact except through the leader. Such a network can create communication underload in which too few or too simple messages are transmitted. In this type of network, group members feel isolated from the group and discussions and generally feel dissatisfied. Whereas the decentralized networks allow each group member to talk to every other group member without restrictions. An open all-channel or decentralized network is best used for group discussions, decision-making, and problem-solving. The all-channel network tends to be fast and accurate compared with a centralized network. Now, we also have informal communication in our daily life as well as in our work life. And the informal communication at work is any type of communication that doesn't take place using the formal methods or structures in a company. It can be spoken, written, or even conveyed through gestures and body language. So the informal communication can be both verbal and nonverbal. The most common form of verbal is the one that is in the written form, in which you see we have texts. So those are usually the not preferred informal communications within an organization. Cross-cultural communication is an important factor. As I mentioned, that the healthcare industry nowadays is not only working with the changing US demographic, in which culturally competent leadership is needed in order to be able to develop ideas and implement projects within an organization. The strategies for effective cross-cultural communication within the workplace should include keeping an open mind, have at least some knowledge of people's cultural backgrounds, practice active listening, watch your nonverbal communication, and maintain a personal touch in your communication with your subordinates. Now, communicating with external stakeholders, in addition to having that cross-cultural communication within an organization, it can also occur outside of an organization with an external stakeholder. Effective communication with the external stakeholders involve environmental assessment to enable managers to identify and make strategic decisions for their organizations. So there are a lot of factors that go into effect in effectively communicating with external partners, specifically when you have such a huge plethora of external partners as is seen in this vision. So all the factors of communication, the processes, the channels, and the levels of communication should be taken into account in order to better manage an organization and create an organizational behavior within your organization that produces the best positive outcome in terms of service delivery to your patients. Thank you so much. This module ends here. The assignment for this week is a discussion post. The instructions for the submission of those discussion posts are available on Brightspace. Please take a look at them and submit your assignments on time. Thank you.